I'm Adam Lupel, IPI Vice President, and it is my honor to welcome you to this speaker series event featuring the Honourable Minister Harjit Singh Sajjan, Minister of National Defence of Canada, who will discuss UN peace operations and Canada's vision for the future of peacekeeping. We gather on International Peacekeeping Day, a day when we acknowledge the great contributions being made by those deployed in peace operations around the world, and we pay tribute to the more than 3,500 peacekeepers who have lost their lives in the line of duty. Recent tragic incidents in Mali, Central African Republic, and the DRC remind us that uniformed and civilian peacekeepers increasingly are at risk of being targeted by violent actors. The altered threat environment is only one dynamic, making modern peacekeeping a more complex endeavor. IPI has been doing a fair amount of research in this regard through the Brian Urquhart Center for Peace Operations, and I have the director, Arthur Boutelis, and his team to thank for that excellent work. One of the things that work has shown is that as mandates and circumstances for peace operations grow more complex, it is crucially important to ensure that missions are properly staffed, equipped, and supported to deliver on their mandates. The UN has made considerable progress on addressing these needs, notably through the work of the Strategic Force Generation Cell and through implementing peace operations reform guided by the recommendations of the high-level panel on peace operations, HIPPO, and advancing the principles of the primacy of politics, the strengthening of partnerships, and the inclusion of the people. My IPI colleague and former member of the HIPPO panel, Yusuf Mahmood, likes to remind me of this always, the importance of politics, partnership, and people, all with the ultimate objective of sustaining peace, lest we forget. Much of IPI's recent peace operations research has specifically focused on the challenges associated with operating in asymmetric environments, providing field support, and applying the HIPPO recommendations and the sustaining peace concept to specific country contexts. There are a lot of ideas, proposals, concepts on the table. We need to get specific about what they mean in concrete terms in the field. And member states are leading the way. Since September 2015, the Peacekeeping Leaders Summits have reflected the growing consensus that member states must do more to accompany the UN Secretariat in ensuring peace operations are given adequate capacity to deliver in the field. And we thank Canada for leading in this regard. So we look forward to hearing the Honourable Minister's views on this topic and more. But before we hear from Minister Sajjan, however, I would like to invite Mr. Atul Khare, UN Undersecretary General in the Department of Field Support, to share opening remarks and to introduce our esteemed speaker. Mr. Undersecretary General, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Honourable Mr. Harjit Sajjan, Minister of National Defence of Canada, distinguished delegates, Dr. Lupel and members of the International Peace Institute, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, friends of peacekeeping. I'm truly honored to be here with you today, and I want to begin by thanking IPI for hosting this event and for providing us with a unique opportunity to discuss the future of UN peace operations with Minister Sajjan. And if I may say so, he requires no introduction, but I wish to highlight that he is a peacekeeper himself. He has done assignments in Bosnia and Herzegovina and 3 assignments in Afghanistan, something I would find a rarity in today's peacekeepers. You have served, Minister, with aplomb, with grace, with providing succor to those who were in need in these extremely difficult and challenging assignments. And we wish to hear from you, both from your past experiences as also in your current capacity as the Minister of National Defence of Canada. I also want to thank IPI for organizing this event on one of the most important and busiest days for UN peacekeepers. Today we are celebrating the UN Peacekeepers Day, but with sadness in our heart, because we have a number of ceremonies honoring the 117 UN peacekeepers, military, police, and civilian alike, who paid the ultimate price last year in the pursuit of peace in these faraway lands. Following Canada's decision to host the next Defense Ministerial meeting on United Nations peacekeeping, my department, together with our sister Department of Peacekeeping Operations, has further enhanced our engagement with the Government of Canada. I fondly recall participating in a roundtable meeting with Minister Sajjan, and thank you for inviting me, along with my former colleague, the then Undersecretary General for Peacekeeping, Hervé Latsous, in Halifax last November. We had a very good discussion on how we could strengthen peacekeeping, including by improving performance, utilizing new and existing technology, enhancing the use of intelligence, and fully implementing the Secretary General's policy on zero tolerance against sexual exploitation and abuse. Dear friends, earlier this year, the Secretary General established an internal review team on peace and security led by Mr. Tamrat Samuel to, and I quote, study the existing proposals for change in the Secretariat peace and security architecture and develop options for further improvements to the functioning of the peace and security work of the Secretariat, end of quote. More recently, the Secretary General also established an internal review team on management, which I have the honor to lead together with my colleague Alicia Barcena, the Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. This team has been tasked by the Secretary General to clearly identify the organization's current management reality, what we want to achieve, the areas that need to be improved or fixed, and proposals for achieving these objectives. The expectation of the Secretary General is that the management reform will underpin the reforms underway in peace and security and in development. The overarching goal for these interlinked reforms is to position the UN system to deliver more effectively in a nimble, pragmatic, and accountable manner. Minister Sajjan, the Vancouver Ministerial will be a good opportunity, under your guidance, to continue discussion on these themes. It may also serve as a forum for high-level discussion on the Secretary General's reform agenda, with key recommendations likely to be before our member states by that point in time. Mr. Sajjan, I look forward to collaborating with you further as we prepare together for the November Ministerial, which we hope to make the most successful ministerial event on peacekeeping. Ladies and gentlemen, I do not wish to stand between you and our gracious invitee, Honourable Minister Sajjan, today. And I wish to conclude by saying once more that we have a lot to learn from him, a lot to learn from Canada, and I wish to take this opportunity to compliment Canada for its contributions to UN peacekeeping, not only by provision of peacekeepers on the operational side, but also in the development of policy, the guidance in various fora of the United Nations. I want to take this opportunity also to thank, in absentia, Commissioner Peter Miller, the Police Commissioner of Timor-Leste. When I was working, I had the opportunity to work with him nearly about 15 years ago. I'm convinced that by working together, we will succeed in bringing peace, security, development, rule of law, and respect for human rights to the most vulnerable people affected by conflict and war. And with this hope, I introduce to you Minister Sajjan.
Okay. Undersecretary General, thank you very much for those kind words. I look forward to working with you. Canada look forward to working with you. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Lupel, thank you very much for those allowing us to use the your institute here today. I wanted to just acknowledge also my good friend and mentor, Dr. Barnett Rubin, who was a mentor of mine when I was younger, working in those conflict zones. Thank you very much for your guidance and to allowing me to have a little bit more of an impact in those areas with the knowledge that you gave. Thank you, Dr. Rubin. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your hospitality. I'm delighted to spend the International Day of the United Nations Peacekeepers with those who are so committed to preventing and resolving global conflicts. As we see here just recently, two peacekeepers who were killed in Mali. Just a reminder that conflict, the cost to conflict, and also most recently, just recently in the UK, our sincere condolences to the population of United Kingdom for their terrible loss as well. So I'm reminded that the best way to honor the dedication and courage of our peacekeepers is to take up their cause with renewed determination. It is clear to me that the International Peace Institute does this every day, and I applaud the leadership in advancing of the global peace and security by your institution. Your work is inspiring. It is work that has contributed enormously to understanding of conflict prevention, mediation, and post-conflict reconstruction. The increasing complexity of United Nations engagements has reinforced that fact now more than ever, that we must collectively work toward common goal of spreading peace and stability throughout the world. No nation can rest on its laurels or just repeat what worked in the past. Peace operations today are more complex than they were during the early days of the Blue Helmets. So our response to this new reality must evolve as well. We know we must reform UN peacekeeping to meet the demands for it now and into the future. The challenge is always in deciding what those reforms should be and how we implement them. Over the last 2 years, the United Nations has begun answering these questions. Several major reviews from across peacekeeping operations spectrum have produced recommendations of how we can progress. The Secretary General has also set out high standards in this initial steps to increase coherence and effectiveness in the United Nations system. He recently said that the interconnected nature of today's crises requires us to connect our own efforts for peace and security, sustainable development, and human rights, and not just in words, but in practice as well. Now, Canada agrees and is encouraged by his ambitious reform agenda. We also recognize the reform agenda is but one piece of a larger puzzle. As a member states, there are practical ways that we can work together to better orient the future of United Nations peacekeeping. One way has been the annual pledging conference, which was first hosted by the United States in 2015, and most recently by the UK in September of 2016. To date, these conferences have been successful in garnering pledges for increased member participation in United Nations peacekeeping operations. We owe a great deal to the members who have co-hosted this great initiative alongside the United Nations. The conferences have also significantly diversified the pool of troops and police contributing countries on United Nations peacekeeping missions. So I'm heartened by the fact that so many troop and police contributing countries carry the UN peacekeeping mantle, and I'm encouraged by how much we can learn from one another. As I've announced, Canada will host the 2017 United Nations Peacekeeping Defense Ministerial on November 14th and 15th in Vancouver, British Columbia, my home city. We are proud to take a leadership role in advancing the UN's peacekeeping agenda. So today, I'm pleased to announce further details on this important initiative. We have established ambitious objectives for this forum. As always, the plan is to maximize our time together. We will review the progress achieved since we last met in 2016 and focus on the best way forward. I'm eager to hear your thoughts and how best we can support meaningful reform on the United Nations system. From my perspective, one important aspect of this will be to broaden the discussion at the upcoming Defense Ministerial in Vancouver. During the conference, we should consider our work in the context of the impressive and progressive work you are doing here in New York. We must also consider the trends we are seeing in the field of global peacekeeping. For instance, it is Canada's belief that addressing the root causes of conflict is a necessary precondition of success. So the father of modern peacekeeping, Lester B. Pearson, once said, "The best defense of peace is not power, but the removal of the causes of war." But make no mistake, we must understand the reality of conflict today and address the threat of radical groups in conflict as well. Also, we maintain that a range of activities from training to humanitarian assistance, development, and education are needed to increase our chances of building a lasting peace. During the ministerial, we will strive to identify pragmatic and innovative solutions to global conflict. We'll build on the 3 Ps, pledges, planning, and performance, as highlighted at last year's ministerial in London. But more than that, we will put a new spotlight on partnerships as well. This focus will be important because the UN system has the greatest impact when it enables others to do great work. To do that, we must build meaningful and sustainable partnerships with governments, regional organizations, civil society actors, so that peacekeeping can be more effective. In Vancouver, we will continue encouraging pledges from member nations, particularly in the areas where the United Nations faces gaps, such as rapid deployment. We will explore ways to accelerate innovations in training and capacity building and to encourage partnerships between the United Nations and countries that contribute troops and police officers. We will explore a variety of ways of protecting the vulnerable populations, including the use of force in protection mandates and engaging with local populations. But I'm also struck by the Secretary General's conflict prevention agenda, and I'm eager to explore the intersection between conflict prevention and peacekeeping. Building on the great work that was done at the London Ministerial, we will once again emphasize the importance of integrating gender perspectives into operation planning. The London Defense Ministerial endorsed ways to improve the planning and performance of UN peacekeeping operations by increasing the participation of women. We in Canada feel strongly about the integration of women at all levels and in all roles in the promotion of peace and security. We know that local conflicts and crises often affect women and girls differently and more severely than they affect other demographic groups. We believe that a diversity of perspectives in operational planning and implementation is essential to improve the circumstances for the most vulnerable populations. Women maximize our collective efforts against gender-based violence. They play a key role in engaging youth and preventing the recruitment of child soldiers. They are actors of peace that can make engagements last in their communities. And many of you here today are troop and police contributing countries, host nations, and regional partners. Ultimately, the goal of our dialogue today, as we head to Vancouver, is to benefit from your firsthand experiences. We will learn from you and build concrete proposals and commitments. I look forward to hosting members in Vancouver and hearing your thoughts about how we can meaningfully contribute to the future of United Nations peacekeeping. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. Okay, yeah, good. Thank you so much. First of all, thank you so much for your kind words of opening about IPI. I really appreciate that. That's always music to my ears to hear. I really appreciate that, and very much appreciate the added details about the upcoming ministerial meeting in Vancouver. I know many of us are really looking forward to in anticipation of what will happen there, and especially your. Highlighting the critical role of partnerships, the importance of integrating gender perspectives, and of course the need to look at the connections between the prevention and peace operations agendas to help build lasting peace. This is something that is really critical to IPI's work moving forward, and so we appreciate that. We've got a good 25 minutes or so for Q&A. As I said, we do have a hard stop at 9:15, but the floor is open for your questions. Yes, here in the front, and I think we'll take a couple, and then
Thank you, Minister. I'm Yoshita Singh with Press Trust of India here in New York. I just wanted to get your thoughts on the incident where the Inspector General of the CRPF, the Central Reserve Police Force, Mr. T.S. Dhillon, was denied entry into Canada on the grounds that he worked for a force that committed human rights abuses. Now, India has objected to this, given that the CRPF has contributed troops to peacekeeping operations in conflict zones. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on this incident and how this can be avoided or steps can be taken to avoid.
I actually was traveling at this time, and I'm sure our immigration department is working on that issue right now.
Here in the second row here. Evan, yeah, thank you. And sorry, yeah, could you please for the webcast state your name and affiliation for the audience? Sure.
Thank you very much, Minister Sajjan, and thank you to IPI for hosting. My name is Evan Sankmars. I'm the UN advisor for the Center for Civilians in Conflict and the network expert on Canada for the Providing for Peacekeeping project. I welcome your comments on rapid deployment, and specifically interested in your thoughts on the following question. The mandate letter that was given to you by Prime Minister Trudeau in November 2015 called on you as the Minister of Defense to help the United Nations respond more quickly to emerging and escalating conflicts as part of Canada's announced re-engagement with UN peace operations. Drawing on this, I have two brief questions. First, how do you intend to use the upcoming Peacekeeping Defense Ministerial to improve this capacity of the United Nations to respond more quickly to emerging or escalating crises? And second, how and where will Canada deploy to assist UN peacekeeping missions in this regard specifically? Thank you.
Do you want to maybe collect a couple questions, or you want to? Yeah, we can take a couple all the way in the back there.
Hi, my name is Sophia Service. I work for Global Citizen, an organization that works to end extreme poverty in line with the SDGs. Thank you, Minister Sajjan, for the enlightening discussion and for being here. As you may be aware, thousands of global citizens, both Canadian and international, are calling on Canada to pledge funding to end polio, a disease that once ravaged many countries is now 99% eradicated. As Defense Minister, how do you see the links between disease prevention and peace building? And what is Canada doing to strengthen national and international security by investing in the prevention of devastating epidemics like polio? Thank you.
We'll take one more before we come back here in the front row here. Familiar face.
Warren Hogue, International Peace Institute. Minister, we are concerned here at the UN, as I'm sure you are, at the rising number of fatalities among peacekeepers. And I wanted to ask you, is there something that must be done to increase protection of peacekeepers?
Great. Thanks.
No, thank you very much. Great questions. With regards to the Vancouver Ministerial and the discussions that we're going to be having there and what Canada's role is going to be, the Prime Minister gave me a clear mandate to where to focus. One of the things when it comes to rapid deployment is also making sure that we in Canada have the ability and sustainability to be able to respond, not just conflicts for the United Nations, but other crises as well. We have conducted a defense policy review that I look forward to announcing on June 7th, which will outline how we're going to make sure that the Canadian Armed Forces is well resourced to be able to give myself and the general the flexibility to be able to plan for crises like this. And so more to follow on that. As to where and how we're going to be conducting our peace operations, we have committed to 600 personnel, 150 police officers, and a whole integrated approach to peace operations. We have not decided as a government to exactly where we're going to do this. And the reason for this is, when it comes to making a contribution, we want to make sure that we're going to add value to a mission. This is not strictly about getting a check in the box of providing support. I'd rather take the time to understand, have the right discussions, and make my recommendations to the Prime Minister and our cabinet to saying the reasons we need to do this is because this is how we will enhance the mission on the ground. We also want to look at the great conversation that is starting right now, the integrated approach. This discussion has not happened before. It is absolutely essential. We're not just talking about sending troops. We're talking about the focus on the political engagement, the capacity building, the development that's needed. And we talked about disease prevention. We need to integrate all this into one, because as we know, conflict impacts populations, and the disparity between the rich and the poor, radical groups. We need to understand the environment that we're getting into, making sure we contribute it properly so we have the impact on the ground. So that's what's going to base our decision to making sure that we have the impact. The question regarding disease prevention, we need to work with all our NGOs, the people who have been on the ground for a very long time. How do we integrate some of the military operations? I'll give you one example. For an example, in Afghanistan, we had areas where we knew that the polio vaccine that was going into certain communities, if we launched certain operations, they weren't able to go. So we were, our commanders at that time worked very closely to making sure that we did not prevent the vaccination going out, and at the same time we had good dialogue where to say, hey, there's going to be good stability in these areas. Here's the potential areas that you can go after. But we also fully understand the importance of their neutrality as well of these the NGOs. So we have to be able to work together to making sure that we get this piece right, because we cannot just strictly look at it as we're going in to provide security, because we have to look at how the population lives and provide an integrated approach for lasting peace. And finally, for any of our nations, when we send our troops into harm's way, it is probably one of the important decisions a country makes, because you're sending your treasure into harm's way. So we need to be able to, one, make sure, and I've said this to the Canadian public quite loudly, which is when we send our troops, we're going to make sure that they're properly equipped, making sure that they have the right rules of engagement for not only protecting themselves, but also to be able to protect the population as well. And that requires a very robust mandate and us being able to work together. And all this has to be integrated into it, to making sure that our troops who are doing the difficult work are going to have the security that they need.
Fatalities? Did you want to say?
Yeah, so that's what I was talking about. Fatality is. That's how we're going to make sure, is making sure part of the, for example, in certain countries, not having the right equipment against some of the threats that are there. And I know the Undersecretary General has already worked a little bit on this, and how contributing nations can have the right equipment. And these are the things that we need to be able to look at, but also some of the supporting work that needs to be done. Preventing fatalities is probably one of the best things we need to focus on, but making sure that our troops go in with the right equipment so that they can have the confidence to be able to do their work is also very important, because at the end of the day, we need to answer to our citizens as well.
Mm-hmm. I would say a critically important topic for today is the Secretary General will be laying the wreath in honor of fallen peacekeepers later today. And I think also the issue of polio that was mentioned and your response strikes me, because it's something that IPI has worked on, and I think that it is a very good example of the need to understand this integrated approach between the political and the security, not just at the national level, but also at the more granular, the local level, because it's fundamentally important to how eradication campaigns can be effective or not. We'll take another round of questions. Yes, here, Mr. Ian Martin.
Thanks. Ian Martin from Security Council Report, and I was a member of HIPPO and had an opportunity to engage with you in that capacity on one of your previous visits to New York. Minister, everything you said today I think was entirely consistent with the approach of HIPPO, if I may say so. And yet, 2 years later, I think one has to ask how much has changed in practice. We still have a situation in which the increase in troops decided by the Security Council from Mali has not been realized in practice, and peacekeepers are dying in the north of Mali because they don't have the equipment that has been recognized that they need to have. It's taken 8 months for the first elements of the Regional Protection Force to arrive in Juba, although that, of course, is partly due to the attitude of the government of South Sudan. But something very important has happened in the Security Council, which is the US pressure for a mission-by-mission review of mandates, capabilities, and although one can be skeptical about how far that's a cost-cutting exercise, it is actually leading the Council to insist on much more strategic review of individual operations. And if I may say so, I think Canada is absolutely right to be hard-nosed about ensuring that any troop deployment it makes is in the context of a well-considered strategic review of any mission it contributes to. And it isn't evident that the Secretariat has yet got out ahead of the drive from the US for mission-by-mission review to make that possible. And I'd like to ask how far you think the ministerial meeting can not just be another pledging conference that didn't transform the ability of the Secretariat to boost the Mali troop contingent, but actually can give a further push to the proper strategic review of integrated strategies in mission contexts.
Excellent. Thank you. Here in the second row. Yep.
Hi, it's Walter Dorn from the Royal Military College of Canada. Minister, you mentioned in your speech the importance of rapid deployment. I'm just wondering why Canada can't increase the number of forces rapidly, as an example of rapid deployment, from the current 30 to 60 or 90, and then be in a much better position when you do make a major contribution of the order of 600 plus 150. Can't those decisions be made more quickly when the UN needs responses within days or weeks in order to deal with the escalating crises?
If you could just pass right behind you there, this gentleman, it was, yeah, and then we'll come back.
Morning, Honourable Minister. My name is Salvatore Cusimano. I work at the UN Department of Peacekeeping Operations. I'm also a Canadian, so it's great to have the chance to talk to you this morning. As a staff member at the Department of Peacekeeping Operations and a Canadian, it's good to hear about your search for Canada's added value. I'd just like to ask, knowing what you know about the strength of our armed forces, the particular strengths of Canada's armed forces, and your assessment of the gaps and challenges facing peacekeeping today, what are some examples that you think Canada has to bring an added value to peacekeeping? Specific examples of the ways Canada could contribute and bring an added value, not just as one of the largest financial contributors to peacekeeping, but as a troop and police contributing country. Thanks.
Great, thanks.
Great, no, thank you. I'm actually very encouraged about the discussions that we actually had in London regarding, it was just about pledges, but a lot of the conversations we had, we talked about a new approach, the reforms, and I'm looking forward to actually in Vancouver having even a much more thorough dialogue that's beyond just pledges. Pledges is extremely important, but the dialogue has already started. In fact, I think because of from the conference in London, I've been able to have these conversations with my counterparts at other meetings as well. So I'm very, it's very, one of the things as defense ministers, we have the NATO meetings, we have the Counter ISIS meetings, we have their conferences, so we get together quite often, and we built a really good relationship. So we're not just looking also, so we have already continued these conversations, and we're going to bring this back into the Defense Ministerial in Vancouver. But we're also taking some of our conversations here and looking at applying it to some of the other work that we're doing. And that's what's also very encouraging right now for me, because that integrated approach, or we've been calling it comprehensive approach, or whatever you want to call it, it is absolutely critical, in my opinion, from the experience that we have faced on the ground. And I am very encouraged that Vancouver, we're going to be able to even progress that even further. And I'm going to get back to rapid deployment afterwards, because it goes into about questions about the gaps and where can Canada best contribute. Sure, our militaries always have unique capabilities that we can provide, and that will always be there. But to me, the most critical piece to this is our experience and other nations' experience on this integrated approach. How do we get our political efforts, our development, our military efforts working together? Because to me, that's what's really going to have the impact. That's going to be able to allow us to understand the realities of what's happening on the ground. Once you have that understanding, it allows you to put the right resources in the right areas. Where do you put the political pressure? Where do we need the development projects? And let's not forget one other thing. How do we actually help the nations in job creation? Sounds very grandiose, but it's critically important. the business community, and I've had many meetings with them, are very encouraged. They could be part of increasing security into certain areas. They have the knowledge base as well. Since we're looking at development, and why don't we look at creating, trying to stimulate job creation? I don't know where this conversation is going to go, but it needs to go in the right direction. And to me, this is the most important thing. When I went to Afghanistan in a very naive way when I first arrived, I thought it was ideology, the Taliban, very one homogenous organization, had no idea, and Dr. Barnett Rubin educated me in many ways regarding this. It wasn't about ideology. It was about my experience in policing was so important. It was about money and power. If you offered a job to a youth there, they took it. And all of a sudden, when you offered them a gun, give them a little bit of authority, and wrap it around with a veneer of religious protection and say, hey, you're doing it for the right thing, why wouldn't they? When we started linking our projects together and I would say out hiring the Taliban to actually give them jobs, guess what? They chose jobs first. So we need to integrate this approach, and this integrated approach to me is the most important piece. The final thing for rapid deployment. Of course, we can get into rapid deployment very easily, but right now we are re-engaging into peace support operations. Before we get into exactly what Canada can deploy with 30 days or even sooner, we do this in domestic operations. We want to make sure that where our contributions are going to help. What is the rapid force going to look like? Where should it go? What type of structure does it need? So these are the discussions that we're going through right now, and we want to make sure that we have all the information and saying, these are the areas we're willing to contribute, and we have many options where we can contribute. We did this mission. We did the same thing for our mission in Iraq, and had a good impact. And we did this for NATO, and we want to apply the same approach for United Nations peace operations, because it won't be just a military solution. Because when we talk about rapid deployment, it might require rapid deployment of other assets as well. But we have the ability. But when we do make that decision, we want to make sure it's the right one.
Great, thank you. I'm glad you mentioned business, because I think when IPI has been working on partnerships following out of the Independent Commission on Multilateralism and our work on the SDGs, we often talk about regional organizations, civil society, and the private sector as fundamentally important for all of these issues. And I think you raising that point now is a good one. I think we've got time for one more round of questions. Yes, please, here, Savita. And.
Thank you for your speech, Minister. I'm Savita Pandey from the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect. You mentioned Canada's commitment to inclusion of the gender perspective in this whole integrated approach. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? And also, working with the Canadian government, I know the prevention of sexual and gender-based violence is a priority for you. So what are some of the concrete strategies that you would include in your participation in United Nations peacekeeping to make this a reality rather than just rhetoric? Thank you.
And here on the right, and then.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Honourable Minister. First of all, let me congratulate you for Canada's re-engagement in peacekeeping, but also continuous engagement here in New York, particularly in the C-34. I'm Yasser Al-Fay from the Moroccan mission, but also the NAM, Non-Aligned Movement Coordinator for Peacekeeping. I have very brief questions regarding the issue of capability that you mentioned earlier and appropriate equipment for troops. How do we resolve the issue of having the right equipment versus the lack of financing? Many countries have the equipment ready to be deployed, but then when they request the UN, they say, well, it's not in the statement of, the administrative problems that some countries could face. Second question about the Vancouver ministerial meeting. First, I would like to know if there is any link with the Paris conference, given Canada is one of the major Francophone countries. Is there any follow-up on that? And second point, about the inclusivity. We know that for the previous meetings, be it here in New York, all TCCs were invited, some as observers if they didn't pledge. In London, only countries that pledges. So I'd like to see how this is going to be done in Vancouver. Thank you very much.
Great. And one last question here from the mentor, Professor. No quiz questions here for your former...
Barney Rubin, Harjit, thank you very much for those kind words, as I want to let everyone know how much I've learned from you over that time and appreciated working with you. this is a slightly different topic, but tonight you're going to Brussels for the NATO meeting. So I wondered if you could say a few words about what are Canada's objectives for that NATO meeting and how you plan to respond to what we know of the American objectives, which are greater burden sharing and more troops for Afghanistan.
Great, potentially news-making question there from the professor.
Thanks for that, Barney.
Yeah. Great. So we have just 7-8 minutes here for you to wrap up.
Very quickly. No, Canada firmly believes in the work that we're doing with gender integration. This is not a buzzword. And talk about practicality. The Prime Minister, he's the first Prime Minister to have a 50% women in cabinet, and it was wonderful to see France also doing this as well. So this is about turning a vision and a desire into practicality. Everything that we do in terms of whether it's our operations or even in government, we have a gender-based analysis plus that's conducted. With our defense policy review, I didn't conduct a defense policy review and then do a gender-based analysis. We had it all through the process, all the way through, and you'll see that. So when, for example, our operations overseas will have a gender-based an advisor that deploys to actually even to Latvia in NATO, and we will continue to do this. And we also need to learn from one another as well. I was very encouraged when I went to a trip to Africa, the various nations, and they brought this continually up, and so we need to be able to learn from one another, because at the end of the day, this is not about tokenism. And I also just want to say one thing: we are not tapping into the entire population, all the great ideas, the innovation. If we don't do this, we are shooting ourselves in the foot if by not doing this. So it's critically important as well, and it will bring stability if we put the right emphasis on this, and I believe that we're all moving in the right direction. In terms of equipment and for missions, absolutely. Part of the problem of, I think, also is why certain troops might get actually targeted, because they don't have the right equipment, so it becomes an easy target. I know the Undersecretary General is looking at options, maybe nations that can provide equipment. We will always send the right equipment with our troops. In terms of capacity building and equipment, we're also looking at ideas and how do we look at peace support operations in a different way. For example, some nations may not have the same level of training that comes in. Maybe we can, for example, we're looking at ideas of doing pre-deployment training with the troop contributing nation before going into a mission. And actually potentially looking at actually mentoring them on the peace support operations as well. So you're doing two things. One, increase the capacity. Two, you're actually having a greater impact on the mission directly. Now you actually have a metric to work with. These are the discussions I'm looking forward to having in Vancouver, and one of the reasons why we're also making sure that we in Canada get this piece right before we make our final decision. When it comes to how the conference will be conducted, I look to the UN, because we are the host, and I look to them for how the setup and the guidance they want for this, and I want to be inclusive as possible. And Barney, yes, for NATO, for burden sharing, absolutely. We in Canada too believe in burden sharing. I conducted a defense policy review to making focused on outputs. What are we as a nation going to do? Not just focused also in Canada, our responsibility in North America and the Asia Pacific, but a very important relationship to our multilateral partnership at NATO. Burden sharing is very important. So our defense policy review that we conducted looked at that. Then we looked at what capabilities we need into the future, and with a 20-year plan. And then what we looked at was what's the cost for these capabilities. So we had it costed by different companies. We had 5 different companies review it, and then we as a government have funded it. So to make it much more credible, so moving forward when we go to NATO, we're not going to announce our defense policy just yet, because we want to announce it to Canadians first. And it is a very important discussion. It's about making sure we have the right investments into our defense to meet the actual capabilities at the end that we need. That's focused on outputs. So that's the discussion, but the discussion has to also be, what are the challenges that we face, and which nation has the right areas that we can focus on. So I'm looking forward to that conversation. I think it's going to be a very interesting one.
Great, thank you so much. Just all that is left to say thank you for your words, for your wisdom, for the preview of the ministerial in Vancouver, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you so much.
For having me.